Okay, so today we are going to get into chapter 8, which covers tables and how to code tables into your web page. All right, let me share my screen. Okay, all right. So that's where we're at on chapter 8. So I'll do some slides, and then I'll probably actually start going through some of the activities today, start coding some of those. I noticed there's quite a few people that still, quite a few of you that are still missing chapter 7 case study. Okay, so if you have any questions on that, please email me so I want you to get that turned in as quick as you can. Because we're going to start also this week, once you start working on your final web project, sitemap and wireframe. Okay, so we'll talk about that in more detail on Wednesday. Excuse me, on Wednesday for that assignment. So that's what you should be working on. It's kind of the next step for that final project. Okay, so need to get started on that. But today we'll talk about tables. So let me open up the slides here. All right. Okay, so tables are something that you'll use. Kind of, it's a little bit of history on tables. Back when we first started developing websites, designing web pages back in the late 90s, early 2000s, we were actually using tables quite a bit for layout purposes. Because we would kind of like, with our 3-column page layouts that we've been working on, we would use a table to set up that layout. And we'd also do things where you'd have like a big image in Photoshop and you'd slice it up and kind of slice them into pieces as far as like the header and the nav and everything. And it was like all images, and then you would bring those into a table for the layout. But with better browsers, better web browsers, CSS, right, HTML5, things like that, we don't really use tables so much for layout anymore. Actually, you probably should never use tables for layout because they're not responsive for the most part. So really we use tables to display data for the main, kind of the main purpose of a table, okay? So if you have something in your website where you need to display like almost like something you would create with an Excel spreadsheet, right? You'd set up a table for that. Okay, so we'll go through the basics of setting up the table, talk about how to make it a little more accessible, and then there's actually some things we can do with CSS to style some of the tables. All right, so these tables are used, like I said, to kind of organize information, right? Composed of rows and columns, right? So anything like you would think about in the basic spreadsheet in Excel is kind of how the table's formatted as well. So each table cell is kind of at that intersection of a row and a column, okay? And so the elements that we use are TR, table, and TD, okay? So those are our elements. All right, so the table element, so that first tag that you see there, that's what we put everything inside of. Okay, so we'll have an opening and closing table element. And then the TR, those are your table rows. Okay, and then the TD, those are the table cells. And then we can also include a caption element, which is a description of the table. All right, so this is a super simple example here of how we would do a table. We first set up, so we got our opening table element tag there. We also can add a border. Okay, so you're going to sometimes want to have a border around that table. And so you can add in border equals 1. So that'll be a 1 pixel border. The caption there is bird sightings. Okay, so that's going to be kind of like the title of the table. And then we start in with our different rows, right? We have our TR tag element, and then we have the TD elements inside of that, which are basically our 2 columns that we're going to have set up. And then, so that's our first row, which is kind of like the setting up the names of our columns. And then for the second row, then we start putting in the actual data. Okay, so you can kind of see here how this is set up. We have the caption up there at the top. We have our first row with the name and date for those 2 columns. And then we have our first entry there, the Bobo link, the date. Okay, so, and then you can see we go to our next, the third row. We have that Upland Sandpiper. Okay, so you can see the that text is embedded in between the 2 TD element tags there. All right, and then at the end, we use that closing table tag to close everything off and end the table. Okay. All right, so here's another example where we'll use, okay, we got our opening table, opening tag there, again, border 1, so 1 pixel. We have our initial TR row that has the, the headings of our columns. So we have name and birthday. All right, and then we start in on our second one there where we have the first entry. Okay, so we have our second row TR, and then we have TD, James, and then TD for the date of his birthday. We close that row off. Then we have another one, TD, Karen, and TD for the date. All right, and then TR, and then the table, the closing table tag. Okay. All right. So that's just the basics of how to set up a table. Okay, it's not too complex if you just think about, start with the table element, then we have our row elements, and then inside of our row elements we have our the data. So I think of TD as the table data. Okay. Okay, so these are some of the attributes, right? Some of these are obsolete. Okay, they'll still show up sometimes, but really we've kind of moved away from them as far as best practices. So like line, background color, border, cell padding, cell spacing. Instead, what we're using is CSS to configure a lot of that. Okay, we'll still use the border attribute. So kind of like we did here, where we have that an opening tag will include a border. But really the rest of these we'll use CSS to configure some of the styling of those tables. So we'll use call span and row span in the table cell attributes. All right, but a lot of these again, we'll use CSS instead of configuring that inside the HTML. All right, so what if you want to have a row that kind of takes the space of like 2 columns, right? So in that case, we'd use the call span attribute. All right, so we can see that here. We have our opening table tag, and then we have our first row. And inside that row, so that first TR element, we're going to include a TD call span equals 2, right? And so what that's telling it is that it's going to span across 2 columns for that single row. Okay, so if you had something where just like a list and you wanted the first column and then the second column, but you wanted the first row to take up both of those columns, you'd use that call span. And then the 2 represents how many columns you want to have that row span across. Okay, all right. And then kind of the opposite, if you want like 1 column to take up multiple rows, you're going to use the row span. All right, so you can see here in that first TR element, we have that TD row span equals 2. Okay, so that's going to take up two rows, right? So if you needed to do some sort of layout where you just have one column that's taking up multiple rows, you can use this attribute. All right, so accessibility, we'll usually want to include table header elements to indicate row or column headings. Also use the caption element to provide text title or caption for that table. Okay, and if we have complex tables, we want to associate the table cell values with their corresponding headers. Okay, so through the TH and TD attributes. All right, so the reason we do that, just again, to make it more accessible, if somebody's using a screen reader to look at our page, they can understand what's happening with the table. Okay, so here's an example of using some of those attributes. Okay, we have our first opening table tag, border 1. We have caption, it's called bird sightings. Again, it's kind of the title there. All right, and then we have our first row. Okay, and so we're going to include in that first TH, the table header. We're going to give it an ID called name, and then we're also going to give the second one there an ID of date. All right. So again, this is just accessibility best practices. Okay, and then if we go to our second row. Okay, we're going to have the headers equal name, and then the first one's boba link. Okay, and then the date 5/25/10. All right, so we just for accessibility want to include that little bit of extra information there. Okay, so that headers equals, add that to our the data part of our table. Okay, so that way when the screen readers are going through, they'll tell the person that this is name, boba link, date 5/25. Okay, so it's going to name all that information out loud for them. All right. Okay, so CSS, like I said, we use CSS now to style most of our tables. Okay, so some of the properties that we use for our different attributes. Okay, alignment, we can center align a table. We can tell it how wide. We can have our margins. Within the cells, we can text align, like center, right, left, whatever we want there. For the background color, of course, we use our background color property, padding for our cell padding, border spacing for our cell spacing. Okay, so how far apart we want our different cells. The height of the table, vertical alignment, width. So we set a certain width for a table if we want. And then again, with the borders, we can style our borders in different ways and even add a background image to the table if we want. Okay, so these are all pretty similar to all of those properties that you guys are used to working with so far. Then we can also even apply pseudo classes to our table. Okay, if we want to create like a zebra striped type appearance, right, where like the first row is maybe a light gray background, and then the second row is white background. Then we go to the third row. Again, we're going to do the light gray background, and the fourth row is white, and then so on, right? So you can create that a little bit easier to visualize if we have a lot of rows. Okay, so we can apply these pseudo classes to those different rows as well. Okay, so like first of type, first child, last of type, okay, nth of type. So that would be like if you want to do odd, even, or even numbered values for the rows. Okay, so that down there at the bottom, if we want to do like the striping, like I was talking about, we can set that up in the TR colon nth of type even, and then set the background color. Okay, so then for every even row, we're going to apply that background color to that row. Table row groups. All right, so we can we can group some of these rows. All right, so like in that first section there, we have our, we're using the T head element. Okay, so that's like our header. Okay, and then we have our T body. Okay, so this is like the body of the table. So again, just kind of another way to organize these. All right, so this is kind of how that looks there. So that first part, the timesheet there at the very top, okay, that's our caption. And then for our headers is the day and hours. And then we have our body, which is the Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, with the hours associated. And then we can even have a footer, okay? So we use the T foot, and that was like our total, and for like total days and total hours there, okay? So T head, T body, T foot. Those are ways that we could organize that table, kind of similar to how we organize our different body elements, sections of our website, except instead of using footer, we use foot, and header, we use head instead. But you have to make sure you have that T added to the beginning of those. All right, so that is it on the slides. Okay, so like I said, I think we can start on some of the coding here. So let me close this out. All right, and so we're gonna do class activity chapter 8. We'll need to download our starter files there. So both of these, the 8 and chapter 2 template. Okay, let's unzip those. I'm gonna go ahead and close the browser there. I'll make a new folder. So chapter 8. Okay. Brackets. Okay, let me get my book here. Started on these. These aren't, this chapter is not going to take you a whole lot of time. All right, so the first one is page 377 in the book. Okay, we're going to create that table there, this school history table. All right. Okay, so we're going to have 3 rows and 3 columns. We're going to use a border and table header element for the cells in the first row. Okay. So let's open up that chapter 2 file, template file. Okay, so let's go down here into our body. And the first one we're going to add here is our table tag. Okay, so we'll get our opening and closing tags there. I'll just set these apart so they're easier to follow. All right, and so we want to have a border of 1, right? So we got to add that into this opening tag. So border equals 1, so just 1 pixel. All right, and then so our first row, we need to add our caption. Okay, so let's put our caption in there. So the caption is going to be school history. All right. Okay, now we can start with our first row here. So we're going to do TR. Okay, and that one, so we're going to use the table header, so TH. And that first one is school attended. right, so we have our opening and closing TH tags. Okay, so the next one is going to be years and TH years. And notice these are all within inside this first row. And then the last one is degree awarded. Okay, so that's going to be our first row there. And by using that TH element, it's going to add a bold. It's going to bold that text for us. All right, so now we're going to go to another row. So that's our first row. Okay, so for our next row, let's do TR. And for this one, we're going to use just that TD tag. Okay, so I always think of it as table data. So the first column. All right, so notice we got 3 columns here. So we have 1, 2, and then 3. So our first one's going to be, what is it here? Schaumburg High. Okay. CHAU school. All right, our next column. 2012, 2016. And that third column for degree awarded. TD. School diploma. All right, so that's our second row. And let's do our last one here. All right, and this one, TD, so it's going to be Harper College. Next one for years attended. 16, 17, and the final column here, that degree awarded, developer. Okay. So that's that last one, and then our last closing table. Okay. So I have some extra line spaces in here. That's fine. It's I just did those to kind of show you the different rows there. That won't affect the layout when it's in the browser. So let's do a file save as, and let's save this into our chapter 8. And we'll call it mytable.html. All right, let's take a look in the browser real quick. Zoom in here. Okay, so you can see we got our caption right up here, school history. Then we have our table headers. So school attended, years, degree awarded, and then we have our other 2 rows right here with 3 columns. Okay, so pretty simple. Do that just to create a simple table. So let's go to 8.2. All right, so now we're going to use the, on this one, we're going to use the row span. Okay, so we talked about column span and row spans. All right, so let's close this out. Open chapter 2 template file back up. All right. Okay, so title of this one, Lighthouse. All right, and then our body. Let's have our opening table element tag there. Border 1. Okay, so we put that in our opening tag. All right. So let's do our first row here. Okay, and then so this first row, we want to add in that row span, okay, because we want the Cana Island Lighthouse to take up multiple columns, right? Okay, so we're going to add in for this first one, TD row span equals 3, okay, because we're going to take up three rows. Okay, so that's inside the opening TD tag for that row, and it's Cana. So this is the text that'll show up. Island Lighthouse. All right, so this is on page 379 in the book. All right, so that's that first one for that first row. Okay, let's go then to our. Okay, so then table that contains the text built. All right, so we also need, before we go to the next row, we got to add in. So this will be that. So think of that left side as one row, even though it's taken up 3 of them, but that's our first one. But then also that built in 1869 is also within that first row. So 1869. All right, so that's the end of our first table row. Okay, now we can do our next one. Okay, and so now we're going to do for next one and the table data. Okay, this one is automated 4. All right, and then our last one. It's tower height. Okay, so that should do it. Let's save this. Let's call it my span. HTML. And okay. So you see here, we got that first row, it's or first column that's spanning 3 different rows. Okay. Even though we're focused on the column, we use the row span because this column is taking up 3 rows. Okay. And then like if we use column span, again, it's if you want one row to take up multiple columns. Okay. So that's in the book, page 379. If you want to follow along with that. So that one, so we did the row span. On the opposite page in the book shows you an example of the column span. Okay, so we're not going to do a column span. It's the same principle. We're just kind of switching it up for columns instead of the rows. Okay, time 1 o'clock. Okay, 8.3, page 382 in the book. So let's add some CSS to our table. Okay. Close this out. All right, so in my folder, let's go and add a new folder called CH8 table. Okay. I need to copy, so let's open up our chapter 8 starter files. Okay, let's use starter.html. go ahead and copy that into my chapter 8 table folder. That should be good. Okay, let's open up that file in brackets. Chapter 8 table starter. Okay, so let's do a file save as index.html. And if I take a look at what we have right now, okay, so we have a basic table here, 3-column, 1, 2, 3, 4 rows, okay, for this coffee menu. But we want to make it look a little bit better than this. So we want to add in some, maybe change up the font, the padding, things like that. Okay, so we're going to do this with the CSS. Okay, so let's hide that. And we can do this, and for this time, we're just going to use embedded CSS up here in the head. Okay, so right here, I've already got style tags, element tags put in. All right, so our first one, let's configure the table element. Okay, so we're going to do table, our curly brackets. All right, first thing we're going to do is set up a margin. We'll just put it to auto. So that way, any type of text that we put in, that's going to flow nice. As the table shrinks and expands, auto will help it look nice in the browser. Let's also change our border up here. Okay, so for our border, we're going to use a 5-pixel solid. Let's give it a color here, kind of a blue. Blue there. And let's set up the width. 600 pixels. All right. Okay, so the next one, we're going to configure the TD and TH elements. Okay, so I'm going to add another one here, TD, comma, space TH, because we're going to apply the same styles to both of these elements. So border, pixel, space, solid. Again, that same color. Okay, padding. We're going to do 0.5 M for the padding. And then we're going to change the fonts up. So font, family. We'll do Arial, sans serif. Okay. All right, so moving on now, we want to configure, let's see, go step 3. All right, let's take a look at it, what we got so far. So let's save that. Okay, so already you can tell it's looking better, right? We got some spacing, the fonts are better. Bring that size down a little bit. The text is looking a lot better. All right, so it says notice, okay, so step 3 here in the book, notice empty space between the borders of the table cells. Okay, so this here right there. Let's add in, okay, we're going to add in a border spacing to that table element selector. Okay, so right up here under width, let's add one more. So border hyphen spacing, set that at 0. Save that. Okay, So now you can see we got rid of that space in between there. Okay, because what it was doing is it was doing a borderline for each of these cells. And so that's why it was creating kind of a default little space between them. So if we just do border spacing 0, we'll get rid of that. All right, so step 4, let's add styling for the caption. And we're going to change up the font. So font family, Arial, sans serif. All right, font weight. Set that bold. Font size, we're going to make it a little bit bigger. Set it at 1.2 M. And we're going to add a little bit of padding at the bottom of that title. Okay, so let's do padding bottom 0.5 M. Okay, so step 5, let's configure the background colors for the rows. Okay. All right, so let's go up here to TDTH. Okay, we got our padding. Okay, so if we look at it right now, you know, it doesn't look too bad, but stylistically, whoops, sorry. Let me save that. Maybe we don't want to have, you know, all these borders, you know, it kind of makes it look more like an Excel sheet. Okay, so let's go back up here and let's get rid of this. All right, so we're in the TDTH. Okay, instead of having a border, let's do border style. We'll set that to none. Okay, padding 0.5. We got our fonts, so those are good. All right. Now, what we're going to do, we're going to create a new class called alt row. Okay, so let's go down here under caption. Call it for a class. So we use period. So dot alt row. We're going to set the background color. Use EA. Okay, and then so the last step then, what we need to do is modify those TR tags in the HTML and assign the second and fourth TR tags to that specific class that we just set up. Okay, so if we go in here, so that would be, that's our first one. Okay, so this one here, let's do TR class equals alt row. All right, and then for the fourth one, so we'll skip that third one, we'll do the fourth one. So it's going to kind of create that zebra striping effect that we talked about. And then in the next activity, we'll show you another way to do it. Okay, alt row. So we're just assigning a class to that row. Okay, so let's go ahead and save this. And now you can see we got that kind of striped effect, right? I've got rid of those borders, but it's kind of a nice, clean, modern looking table there now. All right. Okay, where are we at? 110. Okay, we should be able to do this real quick. Okay, let's open up. Okay, so let's just keep using the same file that we're using. So instead of using this alt row, let's go ahead and delete this. So we're going to use some of those pseudo classes instead. So we're going to change the selector. All right. So instead of using that alt row class, let's do TR. Okay, so this is for our table row element. So TR:(nth of type. All right, so brackets has it here for me. And then in this value here, we're going to put even. Okay. And then we need to assign the background color. Okay, so background color. All right, let's assign that value. All right, so if we save, and then we won't need these classes, so we can get rid of those. All right, so this we're on 8.4 in the book, page 385. Let me do a save as. I'll just save it as index 2. All right, so you can see got index 2 pulled up. It looks the same as what we did before, except it saves us a little bit of work, right? Because we don't have to go in the HTML and assign a class to each of those rows. We can just do that through the CSS, okay? And so maybe you want to have, so like in the book here, we want to have that first row, maybe a darker background color, okay? Kind of set that apart. So we can do that as well up here in the CSS. We can add another TR:, and for this one, we're going to do first of type. Okay, and for that, we're going to add in a different background color, make it dark. All right, so 006. And we're also going to change the text color of that as well. Color. EA. Okay, so now this should change that, this row right here, the specialty coffee description price. So let's save that and see. Yep. So now we have that, right? So this looks even better because now we have a little bit of a separation between our headline, our heading, and then the individual rows within there, right? So do all this just through the CSS, okay, which is pretty nice. Because then if we have multiple tables on our page, we only have to code in the CSS one time instead of applying that to all the different HTML elements there within the document. Alrighty, that's it. That's it for chapter 8. So pretty easy. So you guys should be able to get through that pretty quickly. So work through those. Again, if you're still working on chapter 7, if you're having trouble with that, I know it's a little bit more complex than stuff we've done before. Make sure you get that done. Email me if you're having questions or problems with that, so we can get that wrapped up. And then what we'll do on Wednesday, I'm going to talk about let's go back to Canvas here. The website, sitemap, and wireframe. Okay, I'm going to talk about that a little bit more on Wednesday, and then we'll get that wrapped up. Also, for those of you students that are in Studio One class on Thursday afternoons, I'm going to be coming in this week to sit down and work with you guys on the sitemap and wireframes for your projects. Okay, so we'll be doing that on Thursday in studio class for those of you that are in Studio One, just to give you kind of a heads up there. Okay, all right, so that's it for today. Like I said, tables are pretty easy. The rest of these chapters throughout the book, it's pretty simple stuff. We'll be doing some work with forms, and then we'll be doing, like I said, some stuff with embedding like video and audio files. And then pretty much from there, it's just working on your final projects. So I've looked at all of your proposals. Everybody has there's great ideas for all the websites that I saw. So we should have some pretty cool sites by the end of the semester. So excited to see you guys getting to start to work on those. Alrighty, that's it. If you got questions, shoot me an email. We'll see you guys on Wednesday. Bye.